Hey, it's Denise, and thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Love Talk. The First Wives Club welcomes you to our platform where we bring testimonies of wives to bear so that we can encourage one another. That's what Love Talk is all about. So, before we get going on today's episode, I want to let you know that this episode is being brought to you by the First Wives Club I'm the Good Thing book. Now, what is this I'm the Good Thing all about? It is directly from scripture. Proverbs 18:22 says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor with the Lord." I'm the good thing is something that God declared about you, not your man. So you can walk boldly in that each and every day. And the book is to help you develop and grow, help you to flourish and get on the other side of fulfillment. So if you don't have your copy, by all means, order your copy today. Visit us online at firstwivesclub.live and order right away. Now, without delay, let's get into this latest episode with Dr. Troy Fitzpatrick. Talk about dropping some nuggets of wisdom. She's going to share with us about being a military wife for a number of years. And I guarantee you, all wives will get a nugget from this conversation. So let's tune in and I'll see you on the other side. All right. So today's episode of Love Talk, we have a very special guest. I'm so excited to have Dr. Troy Fitzpatrick on the line with me. She is a hardworking woman. I mean, she has it coming from every different perspective of her life. And so I can't wait to unpack and unfold. I was thinking about this particular topic and she came to mind once before. And then I listened to a very touching story from her daughter. And it brought back to my remembrance that you spent a significant number of years as a military wife. And I was trying to find someone with really wholesome experience to bring us into that perspective. And so when she did that, I was like, I got to call Dr. Troy so that I could get her on the line. There's a lot of context of wife I can bring to the table, but this one, I'm going to need a little help. So thank you, Dr. Troy, for joining us on Love Talk. All right. So do me a favor, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your family. You got that beautiful bundle of joy. He's as handsome as he can be. He's probably just won over everybody's heart. So tell us about him too. Be sure to tell us about your husband as well as the rest of your family.
Well, I'll be glad to. Denise, let me just say first, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for thinking about me. We've worked together in different capacities and we played together. We've laughed together. And so I feel honored to be a part of Love Talk today. And just to be able to share from my perspective. So again, thank you for thinking about me. Yeah, I'm Dr. Troy. I'd like to introduce myself as, I'm a Christian. I'm a mentor. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm a reverend. And most recently, I am a grandmother. I'm a proud grandmother of a baby boy. So just a little bit about who I am and what I've done. I'm retired from corporate America. And after 20 years, I decided that I wanted to do something different. And it was just a good time for me, meaning that my daughters were in an active time of their life, and I had one daughter about to get married. I had one daughter who was entering and becoming a school teacher, and so she was at that transitional stage. And then I had my youngest daughter who was a senior in high school. So here's what was going on in my world, and those that are in corporate America can attest to this. But my position with the company at the time was phasing out, and it was moving, it was phasing out from here in the Charlotte area and moving to a different location. And so with that, I was given an opportunity to relocate, right? And I was given an opportunity to relocate to 4 different cities within the country, which sounds exciting, except I've been relocating all my life. And, and so, with that, with promotion comes more responsibility, more obligation, right? And so I didn't want to relocate, take on additional work that would not allow me to be a part of my daughter's lives at that time. So, out of prayer and just being led, stepped out on faith. I stepped back from corporate and trust. I love being a part of corporate. I love being a corporate trainer and teaching and developing our leaders within corporate. But it was just an opportunity for me to redirect my focus and do something different and be there for my daughters. So that's what I did. And now I am the president of TLC, Leadership Development Consulting. I describe myself as a leadership development coach. So I help others in their transformation into leadership. So I like to help others reach their fullest potential by developing the leader within themselves. So that's what I do, and a little bit about who I am.
That is so awesome. So now don't hold back. Tell us a little bit about your love story to your beloved Sam. Tell us about
Ah,
it.
all right. So I always say our story may be a little unorthodox, but it's real talk. All right. So I'm from Portsmouth, Virginia, and my husband was a sailor stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, and I was 19 when I met him. And so my friend girl and I that night we said, oh, let's go to the club in Fort Story. And that was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And so we did, just to hang out. I love to dance, and we both did. And so we were leaving the club, and so I saw this gentleman standing over, on the far side, and he was like eyeing me, right? And I'm like, I'm thinking really he's looking at my friend girl, and I kind of whispered to her, that this gentleman was looking at her, and so we again just standing there. He got up enough nerve and walked over and introduced himself, and from that point on we just started this conversation. It felt so right, it felt normal, and we just started talking that evening. We decided that maybe a couple of weeks later we would go out, and we went on a first date, and I really wasn't pleased with him. I thought that, he was really aggressive, and, sailors had a stereotype, and I felt like he was falling within the stereotype. He was just aggressive. He was coming off too fast, too soon.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided, hey, let's be friends. And 2 months later, I ran into him again at the same club, and we started talking again. Well, this time he said he was really sincere, wanted to see where this would go. And 5 months later, we were married.
Oh my gosh, that is quick.
Yes.
Wow, 5 months later. And now it's been a
Thir-
number of years later.
38 years.
That is so phenomenal.
Mm.
So impressive. And you guys have spent most of your lives together, which is beautiful. I know one of the things I say to Chuck all the time is we're growing old together, and it's so wonderful to have that longevity. So congratulations.
Yeah, I like to describe it as we've gone through and grown through together.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So he was a sailor. That's
He
our
was,
hint. And that's our lead in to our conversation today. So
yes.
tell me about your husband's service to this country. So obviously we honor him and we honor other servicemen who make a commitment to this country. So give us a glimpse into his service.
Well, thank you for honoring and recognizing. When he was dedicated. He was a dedicated sailor, and he felt a responsibility to uphold right? What it stood for to be a part of the military. Did he always enjoy the separation piece that came along with it? Absolutely not. But he made it clear before we got married and in our marriage that this was something that he chose to do, and it was his way after marriage of taking care of his family and making sure that his family was taken care of. So he has his own love story for, you know, the military and all that, the challenges and the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows that he experienced. But it being in the military and having that discipline, he always says that because of where he came from, which was the inner city, that the military helped mold him and discipline him and grew him into the man that he became.
Yeah.
So made a big difference in his life being a part of the military, in the military, and serving his country.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. So you guys united really early into his experience. So you have a fair number of years serving or on your end as a military wife. So just tell me what that journey was like.
Oh, wow, Denise, I tell you, it was ebbs and flows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when we first got married, we both were in, we were in love. We were gonna, well, he told me he was going to take me around the world. He was gonna show me the world, and our first duty station was Meridian, Mississippi.
Not
I
the
told him,
world you had in mind.
I told him I was bamboozled. I and let me just say for those who are watching this episode, there's nothing against Meridian, Mississippi. Absolutely nothing. In fact, that was the best duty station that we could have. I couldn't have selected a better duty station for a young married couple, did not really have models of what marriage looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So being in a small, quaint town, if you will, really kind of made us bond together closely. So those 3 years in Meridian, Mississippi were really the springboard, if you will, to our marriage, to a young marriage, young as we were.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the springboard.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to our marriage as a whole, as a military couple, I don't think we experienced anything more differently than, I'm going to use the word, civilian couple. But what I do think we experienced that was different for us was that change was always inevitable. We would have to relocate every 3 to 4 years. So you really didn't get comfortable where you were. You couldn't plant roots, as they say. And you would always have to be prepared to transfer. And there were times when we thought we were going to be in a certain place for a certain amount of time, and then he may have gotten orders because of what he did in the Navy was needed someplace else, and so we had to relocate. So the instability and the inconsistency of really settling in one place, that was the difference. In regards to being married, yeah, you had your challenges, and so one of our challenges that we had was the distance, right? So for those who are familiar with military terminology and what I'm about to say is that, there were times when he was on shore duty. And shore duty was when we were able to be in one location and he never had to leave. So that was shore duty. We always look forward to shore duty. But then after shore duty, there was a rotation into sea duty.
Okay.
And that's when deployment, the big D word, was definitely in the beginning a challenge for us. And I liken it to, because again, I've worked in the corporate America, and when I worked in corporate, I traveled a lot, right? And so I liken it to someone who just has to travel often, very often. The only difference is that in my travels in corporate, I may be gone for 2 or 3 days and then come back home. The longest I've ever been away from my family in my travels were 2 weeks. The longest my husband has been away or was away, being a military service member, was anywhere, a minimum 3 months, but a maximum of 6 to 8 months.
Okay. Well, the good thing is I thought you were going to put years. So, because that seems like it would be overwhelming. But I guess just knowing the dynamics of relationship is it just feels like you're saying that change, it just comes apart and then you got to get your rhythm back. And then it comes apart and then you got to get
That's
your
it.
rhythm back. And
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about how you kind of kept that flow in sync, especially when you began to recognize the cadence. Because I can imagine early on, just like with many relationships, it was hard because you didn't have a balance, you couldn't feel it. But then at some point, it had to shift and click, and you like, okay, I got it. I can put some systems in place. I can put some processes in place to make sure we can realign a little bit better. What was that like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you sound like you've been there also, but but you're spot on. Yeah. So, I'll go back to my first, so the first 3 years of our marriage, we were stationed in Meridian, Mississippi. It was considered, as I said, shore duty. So, he went to a regular job, came home every afternoon. We were newly married, we were in love, and everything was going well. Then we transferred back to my home, Norfolk, Virginia, and he was on his first ship after marriage. And that ship took him out quite a bit. I mean, he would come home for 2 weeks, be gone for 3 months, come back home for a week, be gone for, and I wasn't accustomed to that. That was really new for me. And I was really angry. And I start, in all honesty, I would say I started questioning, is this where I'm supposed to be? Remember, just comparing it with marriages that I had seen. I didn't have that association that husbands would leave their wives for that amount of time and come back and I tell you, I thank God for the people that he has placed in our lives that have wisdom, and that he's placing in our lives that want to see marriages succeed. Now, I can get on a tangent and be very careful about who you allow as married couples in your life and who you allow to give you advice and wisdom. But I was fortunate enough to have a friend that we met in Mississippi that transferred with us back to Virginia. So that couple transferred back to Virginia with us, and they had been married 10 years as opposed to more than we had. And so she was my mentor. And so, whereas I would get angry initially and argue with my husband and thinking that, oh, you just want to do this and you just want to be apart from us and so on and so forth. And she would say to me in wisdom, Troy, this is what his job entails. She had more experience with it, and she coached me through. I would say the first year of his deployments. She coached me through. And so she was that person in my life that I could call and say, look, girl, he's getting ready to leave again. He said, yeah, well, my husband's leaving too. So let's just decide what we're going to do while they're gone. And with that, we would set goals, right? We both had children, and so we would say things like, okay, well, we want to make sure our children experience something different every weekend. So if it was taking them to the movies or taking them out to eat or taking them to the park and so we began to set goals like that. And she would just continue to share her wisdom based on the 10 years, right, to our senior, that they had been married. And I learned so much from her. I saw how she was patient, and when her husband would come back home, and how they had a rhythm. Right. So when he would return home, there were things that they had decided, he had to transition into, as opposed to, coming back and now I'm the man of the house and I'm the father and daddy's home. And we kind of mirrored that in our own household, and it began to work. One of the things that I would say that I learned during that time is to develop myself. Right? So my world could not revolve around my husband, because if it did, I would continue to go up and down, up and down, and so what I began to do, just again, receiving good counsel, is start setting goals. What do I want for myself? Right? So when he's away, it's the time for me to start looking at things that I could get involved with. Right? And support groups worked well. So again, I applaud you for what you're doing with the First Wives Club. During my time in the military, there were military wives support groups, but I never engaged with them. And I probably should have, but I just never saw myself wanting to be involved in those type of support groups. I wanted to be a part of support groups that talk more about how I can become a better me, as opposed to just being that military wife. I felt like we were being stereotyped, and I wanted to be Troy Fitzpatrick. I wanted to be me. And so I looked for other ways of developing and growing during those seasons of those deployments when my husband was away.
That's awesome. When I hear your story and I hear like the evolution that you had to go through, I think it's so awesome that God placed someone in your life to help guide you and shepherd you through that. And I know in so many instances people don't recognize the help when it comes in that form, and we reject that counsel because it sounds old fashioned. And I'm glad that you opened yourself to that, because she gave you the wisdom to get through those, what I imagine to be very difficult times, especially when they're coming back. And it's almost like when you finally get the kids settled down and now somebody come in and make some noise and you like, whoa, I just got everything settled down. And so I think that that's a beautiful testament to the wisdom of seeking wise counsel and help.
Absolutely.
Yes, it because I know for my own life, that's a key thing that was a differentiating factor for us as well, especially early on, is finding somebody that I could look to for that mentorship. So thank you.
And someone you can trust, right? Someone you can trust with your emotions and, your state of mind. Someone that don't mind saying, girl, you know what? You need to go rethink that, because that's just not the way that
You need to go there.
Yeah, someone that I always say in your face, but speaking the truth with love.
So I was doing some research as I was preparing for this to try to make sure I could cover some bases. And I read this quote that said, even when they're not deployed, they're still gone. And I imagine in your case, because your intervals were a little bit different, especially with him gone for 3 months, home for a week, gone for this, home for a shorter period of time. Can you relate to that statement at all with your experience?
Yeah, I can, because, and I applaud my husband. I really do. Again, I remember one time he looked at me, and he looked in my eyes, and he said this with emotion. He says, babe, if I could stay home with you and the girls, I would. But I can't, because I took an oath to serve my country. And so my perception from that was that, if he could make a choice, we would be it. He would be home, with us. And however, he had made a promise, right? He had taken an oath. And so to answer your question, what comes to mind is those 2 or 3 days prior to him about to leave, that ship about to leave. At that point, you could see him, I could actually see him thinking, if you will, or just in a focus of trying to get himself mentally prepared for this deployment. So I believe 2 things were going on. How do I say goodbye to my family again? And how do I get prepared to be out on an ocean, right? On a ship for, 3 to 6 months at a time. And so he did go through a preparation. We went through a preparation together. 2 or 3 days before he would leave, we would sit down at the table and we would have, a list of things that would need to be done, while he was away. And Denise, let me tell you, I took on that role of mother and father. Right? I had to take it on. And I think that if you are going to survive those challenges in a military lifestyle, you have to be willing as the spouse, as the wife, to stand up and say, you know what can I do to keep this going? Because the enemy will come in and enemy will say, you don't deserve this. Why are you always left alone? And those are thoughts that have run through my mind several times. But we would come together and as a team, if you will, and we would prepare for that length of time. And so we would talk finances and we would talk about the girls and what their needs would be, and then we would talk about what we would do when he would come back. So as much as we prepared for him to leave, we prepared for him to return. And that motivated me because then, I'm thinking, oh, wow. And we used to do the calendar thing, have the calendar on the wall and do the X. And as those days got closer, the excitement would build up and we would look forward to seeing each other again. That experience, that activity, if you will, has really been a part of our life going forward outside of military, sitting down, having the conversation, communicating with one another. Let's look at the bills, what's coming up, what do we need to prepare for? What are you going to handle? What am I going to handle? So those conversations started, as a result of deployment, but they have really transferred into our civilian life, and it works.
Because you found that rhythm, right? That she was talking
Found that
about.
rhythm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, I will tell you, I recently heard of a family where there was so much movement due to the husband's commitment to military. The wife just decided to stay in one place and not keep moving around. And that creates that separation because he really has taken up residence wherever his assignment is. And she has decided to stay in one place for the sake of the children and not keep with that movement. And I probably can't relate to it much, but I imagine you probably have a perspective of how she might have come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I have, we have friends that have made that decision. Let me just give you one scenario. One scenario that I can think of that actually initiated my husband retiring was the fact that our children, our older girls at the time, were both in high school. And one was a sophomore, one was a senior. And it was time for us to transfer again. So being in Pensacola, Florida, we were on shore duty, and now it was time for us to go back to sea. And so my husband was deliberating and thinking and praying and seeking God as to, after 20 years, what would he have him to do? The girls played a significant part in where they were, right, in school, in their lives. played a significant part in his decision making as well. And so he made a decision because they were at that point where they didn't want to relocate anymore. Relocating was no longer fun to them. Up until that time, it was a game. It was something that they looked forward to. And now as adults, they adapt to change really well. They actually love to travel. They love to move around. But during that phase of their life, they no longer wanted to move again. So to answer your question, yes, I think that marriages can survive when a husband and a wife work together in that decision that they've made. You stay here. Let's build stability for our family, and I'll go out and I'll do what I need to do, and I'll come home. It's still a form of deployment, if you will. It's just that the family is not consistently and constantly moving with the husband, but that the husband is the only one that's really moving. And I can see that working. Would that be a decision or a choice that I made? No. And the reason why is because I found enjoyment and in moving and relocating and meeting new people and experiencing new cultures. And my daughters as well enjoyed that until their senior year. So that wouldn't be a decision that I personally we would have made. But I do have friends that made that decision, and it worked really well for their families and their marriages.
Yeah, because the ones that I hear about, you don't hear about there being a decay or degrade in the relationship. I think they just have become very accustomed to that rhythm and
Yeah.
found that they are willing to continue with it. I don't know that it will be a lifetime choice for them, but as an outsider, as a civilian, I'm looking at it going, who, but taking a deeper dive into trying to prepare for this, I can get it, right? Because you start to get used to that. And after you've done it for 20 years, 25, it's a certain thing that you just have become accustomed to. You've assumed more role and responsibility. And, and even for him, he's adapted to that too, so it just seems like something that could morph that way.
And if I could add to what you're saying, sometimes it's not always about the military spouse, the sailor or the service member, but as a wife, you establish yourself, right? You may have a job that is paying well, and you're growing as a professional or whatever you've chosen to do, and it's just not feasible for you to continue to move around when this is your career here. And so you make those hard decisions, if you will, about what is best for us as a family. And so you really have to look at it individually and say, what's going to work for us? Same thing in regards to a marriage that still applies. You still have to communicate. You still have to build trust, right? In your marriage, you still have to have those hard discussions and that you need to have, whether you're together or apart. And so the sacrifices are still being made in the marriage. It's just that the marriage looks a little bit different from the norm, what we normally see.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we who are not in that type of situation can be a little bit more sensitive about, because you have couple events and you have this events, is how can we be more welcoming to make sure that people don't feel ostracized or out of sorts or out of place in instances where their mate is deployed or their mate is away. And so to me, this is a bit of a wake-up call for extra sensitivity as we're dealing with people. And I always say, you never know what somebody is dealing with on the other side. And this is a perspective that now I've gotten a better sense of, especially in preparing to talk with you. So when I look at Sam is healthy. Now I'm on the outside looking in. He is healthy, fit. He seems mentally there, so it doesn't sound like it's been a traumatic impact for him. But when you look at his service, what was sacrificed most because of his commitment to the military? What do you feel like was a sacrifice that was, drawn upon him or you all together?
Yeah. I think that what he sacrificed was his physical health.
Mm-hmm.
So, he was on and off a ship for about 20 years. And, if you've ever been on one of the Navy ships, it's all about metal, right? It's you just, everything is metal. And I think that physically it left him challenged,
Mm-hmm.
right? With some physical problems, back problems and knee problems and, elbow problems. And he would never, I'm sure he would admit to it, because in his mind, he's still this healthy sailor or a former sailor, right? Retired Navy man. It was hard on his body.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard on his body. And mentally, I would say that, as he listens to, what was going on in Afghanistan and when we were at war, and those things brought some memories back to him because he served in the Persian Gulf War.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was some remembrance of what, some relatable memorances of what he experienced when he was out in the Persian Gulf. And so, those things I think are just, I'm not going to say normal, but I think that those, to your questions, I think that that's some of the impact. And he's a disabled veteran.
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk about his physical condition, those are things that, have been diagnosed as challenges for him, and thus putting him in that disabled veteran category.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I use that little Nextdoor app for your neighborhood where you can
Right,
see
right.
what's going on. And so it was Memorial Day, and there was a guy who posted in there. He was just really bothered that people had started letting off fireworks because he wasn't prepared. And he's like, I served, I have PTSD. And, just all of a sudden these fireworks going off without, expecting them for that particular holiday versus another is a trigger for him,
Yeah,
and again, I don't think that people think about stuff like
they
that,
don't. They
as
don't.
they are considering their neighbors and considering who's around them. So I imagine in your experience, you guys have, especially with him having served in the war, you guys probably know people who have had some sufferings from whether it's PTSD or injuries that were critical, life-threatening, and possibly families that had to deal with death. For the exposure that you had to that, help us understand that better.
Well, you know what? You become, to your point, this gentleman that you're speaking of, you have to become more sensitive to what our military men have experienced. We don't, and I even sometimes, I forget, Fitz, my husband Sam, hasn't been in, he's been retired since 1997, so we've been far removed for a while. um, and so sometimes I forget that there's certain things in certain conversations that may trigger a memory for him. And not often, but it does. And so what we have to do, I believe, is to not take what our military servicemen have experienced for granted. I think that we have to keep in mind that there are some things that they have experienced that they'll never tell you about, and until something traumatic happens to them, will you know and wonder. And for the gentleman who openly shared that, hey, those are triggers. My husband, sometimes fireworks, same thing, impacts him. Now, if he knows it's about to happen, then he's okay. But just to something to start popping off, he's like, what's that? And so I have to remember sometimes that he still, yeah, there's some impact,
Mhm.
and I
Absolutely.
have to be sensitive to it, even in the words that I say. Right. So I can't come across sounding like I'm a commanding officer. Because then it's like, excuse me, who you talking to? So, even my tone and the words that I use cautiously, or just be mindful as to how I say it to him. But then in marriage, that anyway, shouldn't you be
Yes.
mindful how you communicate, how you say things, what tone you're using? Words, is power. And so, yeah, we
Oh, wow.
have to keep that in mind.
So I told you time would go quickly, so I just got two more two more questions for you. So help us either understand, you take the path you choose, something that's grossly understood about a military wife, or just something that, what's the most important thing you've learned? You pick which one. What's either most understood about military wives, or what would you signal as the most important thing that you've learned?
The most important thing that I've learned, Denise, is resiliency, bouncing back. There has been, in the 38 years of our marriage, some ebbs and flows, right? So we've had some highs and lows. In all honesty, I will share this, and this is to for any military wife that's watching, and I love to give this testimony that after the first 10 years of our marriage, and it had nothing to do with the deployments, and we forgot how to communicate to one another. We took each other for granted. We got accustomed to being apart, and we stopped communicating. We let the fire go out after the first 10 years of our marriage, and so we separated for 2 years. And during those 2 years, we never stopped loving one another. It's just that we stopped communicating. We stopped sitting down and writing out, the goals, and the goals for our family, and we stopped talking about them. And I describe it as just letting the fire go out.
Mhm.
And so we walked away from our marriage with for me, I was never gonna return. And I can't speak from my husband's perspective, but I will tell you what happened. So while we're separated, there was a major transformation that took place in my life.
Okay.
One, I became a Christian, and I learned what marriage was supposed to be about according to the Word of God.
Mhm.
And we were missing the mark. I
Mhm.
know I was. And even though I had the wise counseling, I did not approach my marriage from a godly perspective, where God was the center
Mhm.
of the marriage
Mhm.
and everything was built around him. And so over those 2 years, I learned that. I
Mhm.
learned that. And I went through a major transformation. And at the end of the 2 years, I was ready and open to trying again. Likewise, same thing happened with my husband. Now, let me say, we're separated, but we never stopped loving one another. And so he went through a major transformation as well. And then at the end of those 2 years, we started communicating again. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't like, okay, it's 2 years, let's come back together.
Mhm.
Because when we separated, we had no intentions of coming back together. At least I didn't. But after God did what he did within us, through us, he brought us back together, and we began to, if you will, date again.
Mhm.
And we rekindled that joy and that laughter that we once had, and we talked about what love really looks like in a marriage, and what it should look like, and what unconditional love is, as opposed to putting conditions on one another, and expecting each other to be what the other wanted them to be,
Mhm.
but embracing and loving that person for who they are,
Mhm.
and then praying for them to become who God wants them to be. And so we began to approach marriage from a spiritual perspective, and it made the difference in our lives.
Mhm.
So, what did I learn? I learned as a military wife to be resilient, to not quit, to not give up. And it's all right to want to be married and to have a successful marriage.
That's
That's what I learned.
Whew, that was good. You drew me right on in there because that wisdom and nugget is priceless. And I think people, and one of the reasons why I started the First Wives Club is because people think that they're alone. They think that what they're experiencing, nobody has experienced before. And it's because people aren't willing to do what you just did, which is be transparent about a situation you were in and let them know, hey, you can work through it, you can grow from it, and you can come back to your relationship and you can thrive together because 10 has now become 38.
Yeah.
And so you have far exceeded where you were. And the example that you guys are for me, for us, for other people who are coming behind you is priceless. So I applaud your resiliency. It's beautiful. It looks good on y'all.
Oh, thank you.
It really, really does. So thank you, Dr. Choi. You have
Yes.
been a fabulous guest. I
Yes.
appreciate you taking the time. And I think we have only gently tapped into the wisdom that you probably could share with us. So I'm sure I'll be tapping into you again, pulling on your coattail, trying to get 30 minutes of your time.
Oh, I would love to come back and talk. And Denise, if I could leave another word of wisdom
Okay.
to the women who are watching today, I would say to you, your choice as to how you react influences your outcomes.
Yes, it does.
What do I mean by that? You know, Stephen Covey says that we should begin with the end in mind. And so whatever outcomes you're looking for in your marriage, in your life, begin with the end in mind. Think about the outcome and then start behaving and choosing actions that would lead you to that outcome. All right?
That's beautiful.
If I can leave you with that.
Yep, we'll take that and we'll call it a wrap. Thank you, Dr. Choi. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you. Now, wasn't I right about Dr. Choi? We have only tapped into the very surface of her wisdom and experience, and I am so looking forward to bringing her back to share more. Her nugget on being resilient, her transparency on her own experience in her own marriage is an encouragement to everybody that regardless of what you face, reconciliation can happen and you can still go the distance. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Love Talk, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Denise Taylor, signing off.